It is now my pleasure to introduce Joshua M. Greene, who co-authored Hidden, A True Story of the Holocaust with Mrs. Fanya Gottesfeld Heller. Mr. Greene earned his degrees in religious studies at Hofstra University and is a frequent speaker at legal education courses on issues of Holocaust war crimes proceedings. Mr. Greene's documentaries on the Holocaust period have aired on PBS, Discovery, and his acclaimed book, Justice at Dachau, The Trials of American Prosecutor, was released this year in paperback by the American Bar Association. We're very pleased to have him with us today. Please help me welcome Joshua M. Greene.
Good afternoon. My grandmother had a great word that she used to use all the time, beschert. It was meant to be. This book that Roy Wandelmeyer has done such a marvelous job publishing at Scholastic was meant to be. When Michael Berenbaum first introduced me to Fanya, it was with the expectation that there would be a book of some kind, and the more I spoke with her, the more it was very clear that she wanted it to be for students. She wanted her experiences, the realizations that she's had over the years, to be conveyed and perpetuated for young people. I was here at the museum to meet with Itzik Mais, whom I believe many of you have already met today, to talk about how to establish historical accuracy for middle grade students in this book. And I was early, so I went to the museum bookstore. And there on the bookstore, I was looking to see who publishes memoirs, survivor memoirs. So I was looking. And there in the back was a whole display of the Scholastic survivors. There are 5 or 6 books in this series. I'm seeing, I didn't know that Scholastic did that. But there was no editor's name listed in the book, which for me was a good sign. Someone's really humble about what they've done here. I called Scholastic and managed to get through to Roy Wandelmeyer, and this is his baby. This is something that he's been nurturing along for years now. I said, I don't know if you're looking to extend your series, but the manuscript isn't really complete, but is it something you might consider looking at? He said, please send it along. It was, I think, Roy, correct me if I'm mistaken, within 1 year from the time Michael Berenbaum first introduced me to Fanya to the time the book came out, which is extraordinary. I don't know I've ever heard of a book coming out quite that quickly or achieving the kind of attention that it's received. The book has gone to press now 3 times, and it has exceeded more than 80,000 copies in circulation in the first 2 months of publication. So that's a publishing achievement by any standards. So let's see. Here we go. Yes, indeed. This was not originally planned as a memorial presentation, but it will be brief. This is just a few moments. I want to give you a little bit of a summary of Fanya's story as it is told in Hidden, A True Story of the Holocaust. Fanya Gottesfeld, later Gottesfeld Heller, was born in 1924 in Skala, Ukraine, on the border with Soviet Russia, separated by the Zbruch River. The population of Skala at that time was about 5,500, of which 1,500 were Jews. Poland, Ukraine at this time was home to the largest Jewish community in Europe. And Skala in particular has records going back to the 16th century attesting to the presence of a Jewish community there. Fanya's parents, Charlotte and Benjamin, kept a traditional home, and in the book, Fanya acknowledges her father's love of reading and education as critical to her family's survival when they were in hiding, since he would keep everyone's minds active and attention sharp by reciting passages to them from literature, from Shakespeare, and from scripture. Fanya attended the Beit Am Hebrew School, which at that time housed about 100 students. Here is young Fanya. I don't know if there's I don't have a light on here, but she is 1, 2, second row from the bottom, 1, 2, 3, 4th from the right, with the short dark hair. That's Fanya there. She was one of the only children who survived from that class. And she was 15 years old in 1939, the year Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact, agreeing that they would take no military action against each other for the next 10 years. Well, less than 2 years later, in June of 1941, Hitler betrayed that agreement and sent some 3 million German soldiers into Soviet-held territories. As part of that invasion, the Germans deployed Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing units, with orders to murder so-called enemies of the Nazi Party, in particular Jews. Fanya and her family went into hiding. Scholars are still researching the scale of the Holocaust in the Soviet territories, but the current estimate is about 1.5 million Jews were murdered by these mobile killing squads. First, Fanya and her family hid in an egg-packing warehouse near the home of Fanya's maternal grandfather, where they managed to avoid detection for some time. The soldiers hunting them down, by the way, were not only German, they were also Ukrainians. And there were many reasons why Ukrainians would collaborate with the Germans. In addition to the obvious anti-Semitism, there was also hope that by cooperating, Ukraine might regain its independence. To keep herself and her family alive, Fanya ran to the home of one of her father's former schoolmates, a man by the name of Sidor Sokolovsky. Sidor agreed to hide them in his farmhouse, despite fear of severe repercussions to him and his family if they were discovered hiding Jews. Fanya, her brother Arthur, mother and father hid in a crawl space in Sidor's attic, and then when the raids became more frequent, they squeezed into a tiny outdoor chicken coop, a very, very small structure made of rotted wood and slates, where they managed somehow to survive for nearly 2 years, exposed to harsh winters and brutally boiling summers, and often going for weeks with barely a crust of bread between them. Skala was finally liberated by the Soviet army in March of 1944, and from those 1,500 Jews who lived in Skala prior to the Holocaust, less than 50 survived. Fanya's father went looking for food one day and never returned. The circumstances of his disappearance were never made completely clear, but pogroms were frequent, and Fanya and her mother and brother then relocated to Bytom, which was a coal mining town in Upper Silesia, where there was a Jewish refugee center. After 5 months in that refugee center, a matchmaker known to the family from earlier days in Skala introduced Fanya to a young man, Josef Heller, who had also been in hiding for 2 years. Josef proposed 2 days later, and they married in January 1946. Now, traveling to various cities around post-war Europe, Josef proved to have a sharp eye for quality, antiques, and ceramics, and first edition books and textiles, and that business acumen would eventually make the name Gottesfeld Heller well known in the world of Jewish philanthropy. Fanya's younger brother Arthur, whom you see here both as a young man and in later years, preceded Fanya to America in the 1950s. And then in 1959, Fanya and her husband Josef's visas were finally approved. Arriving in New York, Fanya began studies first in art history at Columbia University, and she would then go on to earn a master's degree in psychology from the New School for Social Research. Part of the great pleasure for me in getting to meet with Fanya perhaps 20 times over the course of creating this middle school edition of her story was exchanging. The intellectual exchange with her was extraordinary. This is a 92-year-old woman whose insights into human nature were so sharp, I just was looking forward to my time with her with great satisfaction. Over the years, Fanya dedicated herself to teaching, in particular inner-city high school students, and her message to students was always consistent. If I can survive what I went through under Nazi and Soviet oppression, you can live through whatever sadnesses you were going through. And then she would encourage them, stay in school, savor the privilege of education and learning, and then go out and do something for the rest of the world. As many of you now know, Fanya was a distinguished member of the Jewish community. She endowed a number of programs, as you heard, a seminar, an annual seminar here at the museum. And the book from Scholastic will assure that her story and experiences and message will be perpetuated and preserved. One of the distinguishing features of the book that I draw your attention to, and of which Fanya was particularly proud, is the questions and answers at the back of the book. There were frequent questions that students would ask her. One was, where was God? As a believing Jew, a deeply believing Jew, that was a good question to ask Fanya. And her answer was always consistent, where was man? Don't blame God for what men do. Other questions that you will find in the back of the book, I think you will find also very helpful in your interaction with young people. That's the extent of this presentation. The only thing that I can add is that there's a saying that papers don't bleed. It takes the courage of a survivor like Fanya Gottesfeld Heller to bring to general understanding an insight into the actual experiences of men and women and children during this horrible period. And we can be grateful that Fanya was as candid and as forthcoming and as persistent in getting her message and experiences out as she was. Thank you very much.